I am the ranking member, the leader of the opposition on the Budget Committee. What the Republican budget does, and no one debates that, everything I'm telling you is absolutely factual. It ends the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. When you end the Affordable Care Act completely, you are throwing 16 million Americans who now have health insurance, in some cases for the first time in their lives, off of health care. That's it, 16 million. The Republican budget cuts Medicaid by $440 billion. Now that does a whole lot of things, and we've heard some discussion of Medicaid tonight, but what it also does is throw another 11 million people off of health insurance completely. In other words, at a time when 35 million people are already uninsured and many more are underinsured, the Republican budget throws 27 million more people off of health care. Raising the minimum wage to at least $10.10 an hour, I personally would go higher than that, would not only be good for low-wage workers, it would reduce spending on Medicaid, public housing, food stamps, and other federal programs by some $7 billion a year. Sadly, when I offered an amendment in committee that called for a substantial increase in the minimum wage, not one of my Republican colleagues voted for it. One of the problems that I have had in describing the Republican budget is that it is so bad, is that it is so far out of touch from where the American people are that people really don't even believe you when you talk about what is in this budget. Today, we live in a society where the top 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Here's the chart. The top 1% owns almost as much wealth. Here's the top 1% going up. Here's the bottom 90% going down. That is the reality. As the Republican budget say, wow, look at that extraordinary disparity in wealth, and we're going to do something about it. Yeah, they do something about it. Their proposals will make the rich even richer and working people even poorer. At a time when senior poverty is increasing, the Republican budget calls for ending Medicare as we know it by turning it into a voucher program. What does that mean? What the Republican idea is that we give people a voucher. I don't know that they have an exact amount for that voucher, maybe $8,000, whatever. And they say, here's a check for $8,000, and you're 85 years of age, and you're struggling with cancer. Here's your check for $8,000, and you go out to a private insurance company, and you get the best deal you can. Well, you tell me, Mr. President, if you're 85 years of age and you're struggling with cancer or heart disease, and somebody gives you a check for $8,000, you tell me what kind of private insurance you're going to be able to get. How many days will it last you in the hospital? This is an effort to undermine and destroy Medicare. It is a disastrous idea. That is exactly what is in the Republican proposal. Mr. President, at a time when millions of disabled people are trying to survive on less than $14,000 a year, the Republican budget would pave the way for a massive cut to Social Security disability insurance. Young people are really wondering whether or not they want to go to college because they're so nervous about the debt that they will have when they come out. What is the Republican response to the crisis of the lack of affordability of college? Here's their response. They would cut Pell Grants by more than $85 billion over the next decade, which would make the cost of college education more expensive for some 8 million Americans. In other words, instead of addressing this crisis, instead of helping make us competitive in a global economy by giving us the best educated workforce, what they do is move us in the wrong direction. In the midst of throwing 27 million Americans off of health insurance, in the midst of cutting $85 billion for Pell Grants to make it harder for our kids to go to college, in the midst of making massive cuts in nutrition programs, which will increase hunger and suffering in the United States of America, Republicans do something else that is literally remarkable, and I know people think I'm not telling the truth. I am. What they say is that when the rich are getting richer, when almost all new income and wealth is going to the people on top, what they have decided to do for the wealthiest 6,000 families in America, the top 0.2%, what they say to these billionaire families, we are going to give you a massive tax break by repealing the estate tax. What we are going to do is give you a $269 billion tax breaks that goes to the top 0.2%. 99.8% of the American people will not gain one nickel in benefit from the repeal of the estate tax. Only goes to the wealthiest of the wealthy. But to add insult to injury, while giving a huge tax break for the billionaire class, what the Republican budget also says is, let's see if we can raise taxes on lower income and working class families by allowing the expanded earned income tax credit and child tax credit to expire. These are tax credits that go to working families and lower income families who have kids. One of the reasons that we have a huge debt, not the only reason, but one of the reasons, is that the United States under President Bush went into war in Iraq, went into war in Afghanistan. Now, nobody knows what the end cost of that war will be by the time we take care of the last veteran 50 or 60 years from now. But the best guesses are that those wars will cost us $4 to $6 trillion by the time we take care of the needs of our last veteran who served in those wars. Mr. President, how do we pay for those wars? How do we pay for those wars? Every other war that this country fought, presidents had the courage to go forward and say, wars are expensive, we're going to raise taxes. Not in this case. Those wars were put on the credit card, $4 to $6 trillion, and we didn't pay for it. But apparently my Republican colleagues haven't learned a simple lesson that you can't be honest and worry about the deficit and then go to war and not pay for it. What they have done in this budget is to increase Pentagon spending by another $38 billion next year and $186 billion over the next 10 years. And how is that paid for? Oh, it's not paid for. It goes on to the credit card. They put it all into the so-called OCO account. And this is, by the way, an account that many of my conservative friends have called an accounting gimmick. So here we are. Here we are, Mr. President, at a time when this country probably faces more serious problems than any time since the Great Depression. Middle class is disappearing, poverty much too high, the gap between the very, very, very rich and everybody else growing wider and wider, real unemployment much too high, young people unable to afford to go to college. And on every one of those issues, the Republican budget does exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. In the year 2015, we should not be voting or bringing forth a budget which makes the billionaires even richer while cutting programs for people who are struggling.